for someone who can no longer take care of themselves? Are you overwhelmed? This is Caregiver Solutions Info with Marcia Teal. Marcia will be hosting an hour of true stories and information, tips and updates of the latest research and necessary information in the caregiving field, focusing on you, the family caregiver. An Alzheimer's disease and dementia care expert, Marcia has 15 years of hands-on experience at Arden Courts, a leader in assisted living dementia communities here in the U.S. Marcia covers everything you need to know as a family caregiver, especially if you care for a loved one with Alzheimer's disease or other related dementia or chronic illness. If you have a friend or relative that is also a family caregiver, call them now. They won't want to miss a minute. And let them know they can watch on caregiversolutions.info. And they can listen on WNN 1470 AM in South Florida or nationally on the iHeartRadio app. Now, sit back, relax, and learn from our host, Marcia Teal, as she brings information to you that may just be the caregiving solution you need.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Caregiver Solutions Info Show. I'm so glad that you could join us today. We have another really good show for you. If you're joining us live stream on your smartphone or your computer, you can do that. Caregiversolutions.info is the website. Or if you're in South Florida, we have Southeast Florida local radio. And if you're joining us in your car or at home on the radio, 1470 AM and 95.3 FM, welcome to the show. So let me ask you a question. As a family caregiver, have you ever considered going to a support group, but maybe hesitated because you weren't sure if the other caregivers could identify with you or that you could identify with them, or if you would be accepted because of your situation, because every situation is different, or maybe you wondered if the support group facilitator would understand what you were going through. Well, my guest today can answer all of those questions and more, because not only is she an experienced caregiver support group facilitator, she's also a former caregiver for her mom. So she's got a lot of experience and a lot of expertise in this field. So I thought it would be great for you to hear from someone who not only has walked through the caregiving shoes and trod that path, but who helps caregivers all the time with the support group meetings and the phone calls and the get-togethers. She is a wonderful person, and I had the opportunity to meet her when I visited San Antonio, Texas a few months ago. And she was working with the Arden Courts there in San Antonio, and I thought so much of her, and I loved her story that I asked her to come on and be a guest on the show. So today, joining me live from San Antonio, Texas, is Doralee Shannon. Doralee, are you with us?
I am here.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for calling in and being with us today. This is a real treat to be able to talk to you again, and I see your beautiful picture up on our screen for our audience to see who we're talking to today. How's the weather in San Antonio?
Well, we had about 7 inches of rain.
Well, I know that you are getting hit hard, so I'm going to, pray that it stops soon. And we're having our own here in South Florida. So we'll just pray for the people to stay well, stay dry, and stay off the roads if you can. But hopefully they're listening to us in a good, safe, warm place today so they can learn a lot, because I know that you have a lot to share. So I introduced you as a support group facilitator in San Antonio, Texas, at a local church. It's Woodlands, right? Woodlands Baptist Church?
Woodland Baptist Church, That's correct.
And you've been there for many, many years. But let's back up. Before we get to that part of the story, I want to back up, because this all started many years ago when you started noticing things about your mom. And
correct.
You were sharing with me that she lived on her own for many years, and she was doing all right, and she was successful at being independent on her own until she wasn't.
Correct.
So what happened? What did you start noticing? How? And I know that you all don't live very close to her. How many hours away were you living from your mom?
5 hours.
5 hours. Okay. So you would work, you were working, and you would go visit her, obviously, whenever you could, and things were fine. But then things started to change. Tell me about that.
Well, let me back up for a second and say, my mother had been the caregiver for my stepdad when he was very sick with heart issues and prostate cancer. Not expected to live. He lived another couple of years, so overall, Mother had been the sole caregiver for her for 4 years. So because of the everyday stress that we didn't pick up on her failing health. When my stepdad passed on Mother's Day of '08, my concern was that Mother had given up everything she did, all her fun things, to take care of him. And then she had no life after he passed. And so she was totally lost.
Oh, because she wasn't connected anymore.
She wasn't connected. She had no one to take care of. She had nothing to do. I mean, she just nothing whatsoever.
Yeah, that's interesting because he was her sole focus, so she gave up her activities and her friends, and now she had no purpose because he was gone. And that's very interesting. That's very a great observation, Doralee, for people, because we always tell people, we tell caregivers to continue to do the things you like to do, and this is a perfect example of what would happen if you don't. So this is very valuable to hear this, actually.
Yes, because you should never give up your life. And we try to tell her that, but she did what she wanted to do, was take care of him. And a lot of times that's what people do. Whether they know it's right or the best thing for them or not, they still do what they are comfortable doing. So after he was gone, she cried, and all she talked about was him, and she totally got discombobulated. Bless her heart. She was just out of sorts.
Yeah, she just didn't know what to do with herself anymore because everything had been invested into him and his care.
Correct.
So what happened then to her?
Well, we had a couple of incidents. One, the first time that we went by the cemetery, no matter where we went, from Mother's house, you had to go by the cemetery where my stepdad was buried or is buried. And we would go by, and my mother would start saying, he was so good to me. He was a good man, and just reminiscing. And she would cry for a little bit. And this went on. And, after a while, we would try to go 5-10 miles out of the way so we wouldn't have to go by the cemetery.
Was it because she was still grieving, or was it because...
She was grieving big time.
Okay.
But, again, she was grieving not just his death. She had nothing at that point as far as she was concerned. I mean, that was her whole life.
Mm-hmm. So she was lonely.
So, very lonely.
Mm-hmm. And you have siblings, right? Don't you have some siblings that are around, or are they far away too?
Yes. No, they were just a few miles from my mother.
Okay.
And she visited with them, and they'd pick her up and take her and spend the day or spend the night or whatever. They kept her active while she was still okay. I mean, but once she got really bad, they couldn't take care of her.
So when you say she got really bad, and I know at one point you told me she was doing some weird things, describe
Yes.
some of those things for us.
Well, one thing that going by the cemetery for about 10 months, she did this number, the crying and the reminiscing and all of that. And then one day, we went by the cemetery, and she said nothing. And I thought, whoa, that's very unusual. So for a few days, I didn't say anything. We went by the cemetery several times, and then I said, Mother, I said, we came to a funeral here not too long ago. Do you remember whose funeral that was? Whose burial that was? And she said, she thought for a while, and then she says, I think it was a friend of Granny's. That's what we called her mother.
Mm-hmm.
And that was it. Of course, toward the end, she did remember who he was.
Mm-hmm.
But another thing that she did was about a year after my stepdad passed away, my mother's brother passed away, and he lived 8 hours away. My brother and his wife took Mother to the funeral.
Mm-hmm.
Somewhere along the way, she got very disoriented because she knew she was going to a funeral, and the funeral that she had been to was her husband's.
Right.
And so once at the funeral, she thought that was her husband's funeral. She was, in her mind, she was going through that all over again.
Mm-hmm.
She didn't know, and then she was like, is this my brother? Is this my husband? She just got weird.
Well, she started
And so
losing that relationship, connection. And that, as you know, is common. But at the time, you thought it was weird because you didn't know what was going on with her, right?
Exactly. This was the big, this is when we realized she was really, something was going on. Because then on the way back the next day, my sister-in-law was in the front seat, and my brother was driving, and my mother kept staring at Bertha, my sister-in-law's purse. And Mother asks, whose purse does that belong to? And my sister-in-law says, that's mine, Grandma. Why? She says, because my wallet is in there and I want it. And who are you? And my sister-in-law says, I'm Bertha, Fred's wife. You are not. And she turns to my brother and says, who is that woman? Where is Bertha? And that was the only time my mother was ugly to my sister-in-law, because she loved my sister-in-law. My sister-in-law was very good to my mother.
Yeah, that must have hurt Bertha, I imagine.
At first, of course it does. But, once you gather your own thoughts and realize what's going on, Bertha never took that at heart.
Well, yeah, once that you got diagnosed, to what was happening,
Right.
It kind of made sense then to everybody, right?
Yes, exactly, because after this was when she was diagnosed with vascular dementia.
So the vascular dementia, because of apparently she had some mini strokes that led to this?
Yes, I think it was a lot of the stress that she had been through.
Mm-hmm. And very likely. How old was your mom at this point, Doralee?
At that point, let's see, she passed at almost 91, and it was 6 years prior to that.
Okay, so she was up there, and
Yes,
our health starts to fail, but the vascular dementia, because of it affecting the brain and then affecting the memory because of that. Well, We're going to take a quick short first break, and when we come back, we're going to find out how Doralee handled this issue with her mom, because she was 5 hours away, and it's going to get interesting. So stay with us, and we'll be right back.
Arden Courts is not just a place to live, it's a place to call home. Residential living combined with quality caregiving. This is the philosophy behind Arden Courts. Communities created exclusively for individuals with Alzheimer's disease and related dementia who would benefit from a safe and structured environment. For additional information about any of the unique services Arden Courts provides, call 888-478-2410 to locate a community nearest you. Inquire about our educational seminars, resource library, or support groups, or simply feel free to ask questions you may have about Alzheimer's and related dementias. At Arden Courts, we know, we understand, and we can help because memory care is all we do. Remember, call 888-478-2410 for additional information about any of the unique services Arden Courts provides.
Hi, I'm Michael Mole, owner of Senior Helpers of South Palm Beach. Senior Helpers is dedicated to providing quality care in
Feelings of depression, isolation, and frustration are common among persons living with Alzheimer's or related dementias. It's common among those who care for them, too. It takes a lot of patience and courage. It also takes knowing when you can no longer do it alone. At Arden Courts, memory care is all we do. Talk to us. We know. We understand. We can help. Don't let guilt keep you from making the right decision. Visit arden-courts.com. Arden Courts follows Equal Housing Opportunity Guidelines.
We're back, and my guest today is Doralee Shannon. She's from San Antonio, Texas, and she's a former caregiver, but also a current support group facilitator for caregivers. So welcome again, Doralee, and thanks for being here with us. We're talking about your mom and how things started to change with her after the passing of her husband. And how the family started noticing some weird things going on, how she didn't recognize family members, how she had time and places mixed up. Is this about the time when the family decided that she couldn't live alone anymore?
She continued to live alone for another year. But I first got a provider, and then she didn't want a provider. She didn't want to go into a home. So we ended up flipping a coin, basically. It was, Mother, we've got to do one or the other. And since she was at a point where she couldn't make the decisions anymore, I had to make them for her.
Right.
So we started out with the provider, and we did that for about a year.
So that when you say provider, you mean someone that comes into her house
caregiver.
To assist her
Yes.
with some of her daily activities?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. You know, at first the diagnosis of dementia is devastating to anybody.
Mm-hmm.
A period of extreme stress and conflict, once the fears are faced, once one starts looking for coping tools, the search never ends, but the need to deny, rationalize, and defeat the inevitable, starts to diminish, and you join your loved one in the journey. You stop trying to fix it and start accepting. And that is saying a lot in one long sentence.
Yeah, that's easier said than done sometimes.
Yes. Unless you've been there or you're going through it, you don't understand it. But after my mother was diagnosed with vascular dementia, I set out to find out all I could about the disease. I researched, I read, I studied, took classes, and I read books of family members who had gone through the journey with their loved ones and things that they would suggest to do or not to do. Those are the best teachers.
Right, people that have walked
very
in your
lucky.
shoes.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. But
and I was very lucky.
How did you
Go ahead.
care for her if you live 5 hours away? Wasn't that difficult?
It was very difficult. But, my phone was constantly, we were on the phone back and forth. I was either talking to her while I could, but then later on, that stopped. But I communicated with my aunt, who was very close to my mother. I communicated even with my neighbors. I mean, my mother's neighbors.
Mm-hmm. To keep tabs on what was going on.
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
I always knew what was going on, and almost 24/7. I made enough calls that I always knew what was going on. I always knew when to be concerned. I always knew when things were okay.
Now, how did you do
when
all
things
of
were-
that while working full time?
It was my own business.
Okay, so you could
So
take
I
some
was-
time.
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
yes. Which is what I did.
But yeah, still, it's your business. You still have to take time from it to give to
Yeah.
the caregiving efforts, and not every daughter who's in that situation can do that, and especially hard since mother was 5 hours away, and you had some
Correct.
siblings, but for whatever reason they weren't able to really assist you, were they?
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So did you become the power of attorney at this point, or had your mom, had she already made that designation before she was diagnosed?
About the time, well, actually, the day that she got back from the trip to her brother's funeral,
Mm-hmm.
and I went down there to get her to a neurologist, and I spent time with her, and I said, we need to sit down and talk, because if you go through what you went through, she was very aware of the fact that she wasn't aware of anything that was going on the day before.
Okay, so she knew she wasn't right.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And so I said, we need to sit down and talk. We've got a lot of things to plan, and this is a good time, because what if you had not come back to your normal self? What would I have done?
Mm-hmm.
And basically, my mother always felt like, what I want. But it was better for me to sit there and talk with her and make decisions that she wanted me, the things she wanted, me to do.
Mm-hmm.
Because I didn't want my siblings to say, well, you decided. Why did you decide?
Yeah.
So I wanted to be fair.
Right. And that was
But
smart.
That night.
That was real smart to do it sooner than later for a lot of reasons.
Yes.
But do you think your mother was scared when she realized that she wasn't right the day before, and she was kind of more lucid the next day and realized that things were not right with her? Do you think that scared her a little bit?
She was very scared. She kept saying, I'm going crazy.
Mm-hmm.
I don't understand what's going on.
Mm-hmm. And it's important for
Someday.
people to pay attention to that, because that's right, the beginning stages, and people usually get to the
Exactly.
point where they are aware of what's happening with them, and it does make them very scared. And at that
Yes.
point, it's like an internal conflict, within them. And when people are afraid, they either do the fight or flight thing. They either run away from it or
Right.
fight against it.
Yeah.
And to get her, to agree to give you her power of attorney for the future was perfect timing at that point, while she could still understand what she was, about to do. And some people wait too long and don't get it, and that's another whole, yarn of,
Yes.
ball of wax, as they say, or ball of yarn, because
Yeah.
it gets more messy. But that was
Right.
good. So you continued then to make these decisions as her power of attorney.
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
But the next morning, Marcia, I said, Mom, let's have a cup of coffee and kind of go over this and finalize it, make sure that you understand it, and let's set it aside and enjoy the day. And so she said, okay. So as I started telling her what she had told me the night before, she goes, I didn't say that.
Uh-oh.
And I thought, oh my gosh, because that's what I was trying to avoid.
Right.
And then we went through several things, and I think she was so scared that she could not say, I said that. She was saying, I am fine. Why are you doing that?
So now she's in denial of what's happening.
Yes.
And that makes it really tough, for families when there's a problem and the person who with the problem is denying it. That's a tough place to be in.
Well, especially if that denial becomes, if it's a major thing to the family.
Mm-hmm.
As it was, it really didn't cause any other problems, but it could have.
Sure.
Yeah.
So you continued then after that to make these decisions, and Mom was some days better than other days, which is fairly common and when people are
Right.
in these throes of different stages of dementia. And so did you have any backlash at all from your siblings? I know because sometimes families tell me they run into family dynamics with siblings, especially when there's one sibling in charge, and I know that Mom gave you the power of attorney, but did you experience any of that, or was it okay for you?
A little bit, but really what my other siblings said was Mother gave her the power of attorney. We go along with that.
Okay, so
And that pretty well stopped it.
okay, all right. Well, that was
Yeah.
good because
Yes.
there's been some other families that aren't so lucky that way, and
Exactly.
so that was a good thing. So we're gonna take a quick break, and when we come back, Dorley's gonna share what happened toward the end with Mom and how she dealt with that, and then we're gonna switch gears and talk about how she has this other interest now of being a support group facilitator and how that come about. So we're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back.
The inability to recognize the obvious often occurs with Alzheimer's, particularly among the family members who care for them. When the time comes for you to decide that someone you love needs more help than you can give, will you be able to recognize it? Don't wait for a crisis to make the decision for you. Talk to us. We know. We understand. We can help. Arden Courts. Wandering is a common problem for people with Alzheimer's or related dementias. It's also a problem for family members who care for them. Keeping them safe and secure means never letting your guard down. And even though deep down you know it's time, it hurts to have to ask for help. But it could hurt them even more if you didn't. We know. We understand. We can help. Arden Courts.
Info. If you have a question or wish to share a story, call into the show at 888-565-1470 and talk with Marcia. Now, back to Caregiver Solutions.
I'd like to take this opportunity to thank our national sponsor, Arden Courts Memory Care Community. Arden Courts is a leader in memory care because memory care is all they do, and they do it so well. Arden Courts cares about not only the residents they care for, but about you, the family member. And so they have a lot of educational resources available to you just for the asking. One of them is this book. It's called The 36-Hour Day. It's a wonderful resource for caregivers. It has great information. It explains all different kinds of examples of what you can expect as a caregiver. It also explains the differences between different types of dementia. It's a wonderful book, and if you don't have it, you can get it just by calling Arden Courts on their toll-free number, giving them your name and address, and they'll be happy to get a book mailed off right to you. So get a pencil and write down this number. It's toll-free, 888-478-2410. Again, 888-478-2410. Call Arden Courts today and get your free copy of the 36-Hour Day book. I highly recommend it, and you'll be glad that you did. So today, my guest is not only a former caregiver for her mom, she also is a caregiver support group facilitator in San Antonio, Texas, and she is joining me via the telephone from San Antonio. Her name is Dora Lee Shannon. So thank you again, Dora Lee, and we're talking about your mom and how you got the power of attorney in time to make those tough decisions for her. And, you know, things were going along and you were doing this via 5 hours away, which is tough in itself, but you had help at home for her with a private duty. What happened next? And my other question to that is, you mentioned that you read a lot of books and you read and studied as much as you could find out about the vascular dementia and dementia in general. And how helpful was that as you were going through this time with your mom?
I could have not done it without what I did. Because in being a facilitator, I see the mistakes that people make by not educating themselves. And in the process, they end up being in arrears of the disease instead of in front of it. And so they never have any peace of mind because everything they do is the wrong thing.
So, in
And
other
that
words, I
just
think
happens to
what I
be-
hear you saying is they're more reacting to the situation instead of being proactive, they're reacting.
Exactly.
And that's not a good place to be in because you're always on
It is
edge.
not.
You're on pins and needles expecting the next bad thing to happen instead of, like you said, getting in front of it. And I agree with you that so important to learn about it. And even if what you read might not happen to your person, it could. But unfortunately, we don't know which way things are going to go, and anything could happen.
Well, and you're still going to learn about it so that if the time comes, you know.
Right.
And if the time doesn't come, then you're very grateful that it didn't.
There you go.
But you can also help someone else who
And-
is going through something that your loved one is not going through.
Well,
And
let-
you can say, well, you know what? I read it here.
Yeah.
I'll loan you this book or this article or whatever.
Okay. And that's what happened to you because at some point down the road,
Yes.
you all of a sudden
God
had a
put the
realization
desire.
that maybe you should be the one to help more people. How did that happen? What came along that made you have that aha moment?
I was down there with Mother, and I had left her, and I went back to my motel room, and I was journaling because I did a lot of journaling during that time, and that's when it just hit me. God put the desire in my heart to help others avoid a lot of the heartaches and the guilt that goes along with dementia. And, you know, I just sat there and I thought, of course, you know, I mean, all I have done has been not just for my mother, but in honor of my mother.
That's very nice to honor her in a way that you're helping others through similar situation.
Correct. And my mother was still alive when I started the support group, the Alzheimer's Caregiver Support Group. And she, by then, did not know that I did it. I never told her, but I don't think she would have understood at that point. But she does now.
Yeah.
And it's been 5 years since I have been facilitating the meetings.
5 years. And does it get any easier?
Yes, it does. Because, I don't try to tippy-toe around a subject that is very important. I try to say it as gentle as I can, but at the same time if you don't do this, this is what's going to happen.
So you lay it out on the line for them.
Yes. I had a gentleman that said, I had told him, I said, you really need to get in, it doesn't have to be our support group, but a support group. I said, because what happens is that it's going to kill you before it kills her. And I explained, what they say about that, what
Right.
the books say about that.
Right, the stress.
And so, yes. And so he heard me, and he attended for a few times, but his wife didn't want him to attend, so he just stopped. Well, he had a stroke, and when he got out of the hospital, the first Sunday he was back in the hospital, he called me. He just motioned for me to go to him, and I went, and I was just saying, I'm so glad you're doing okay and all that, and he goes, you were right. I should have listened to you the first time. I mean, that was the first thing out of his mouth. And I realized, that I had kind of been a little, you need to do this, but that's what he remembered.
Well, sometimes you as a facilitator, you're in a precarious situation because sometimes,
Yeah.
You push the envelope a little bit because you're telling people what they need to hear when they don't always want to hear it. And sometimes
Right.
you wonder, did I go too far? But then again, in your case, your answer back from him was, I needed to hear that. Maybe I didn't listen to
Yes.
you, and I should have, but he needed to hear it. And unfortunately, it took him having a stroke to realize that he should heed that advice.
Right, yeah. People don't realize how difficult it is caring for a loved one. The
And
journey is yours also.
And being walking in their shoes, Doralee, being a caregiver for your mom at that time, and then having all the experience that you had with your mother, you could really identify with the others in the group, and having all that extra knowledge and information that you studied and you lived. I know that people there at the Woodlands Baptist Church are very, very lucky to have you doing that for the group, because there can never be enough support, for caregivers.
That's correct.
Do you find that it's hard for people to make that first step to come? I mean, and this gentleman, his wife didn't want to do it and he wanted to please her, but do you think there's other reasons why people might not take that first step to attend a support group?
Because they are embarrassed that someone they love has dementia. If someone has cancer, everybody jumps to help. What can I do? Anything.
Mm-hmm.
But when somebody has dementia, people don't know what to say. They don't know what to do. They don't know how to help because they're not educated in dementia.
Mm-hmm.
And so for lack of knowing what to do, they do nothing.
So I have a great idea just popped into my head. Why don't you start a support group for people that aren't caregivers, so that you can educate another population of people to know how to take care of the caregiver who's caring for somebody else? There you go. There's another role for you.
One more job.
One more job. One more job. But you're right. I mean, I'm being a little facetious, but
Yes.
you're
Yes.
right that people don't know what to do, and they tend then to maybe step back, and because lack of knowledge or what they could say or do. And so it's important for people that if you know somebody, right, a neighbor, someone in your family, it's important for you to get that information. And are family members in general invited to support groups to learn along with the primary caregiver?
Yes.
So that would be helpful if more extended family would come and do the support group as a unit, because then you have
Yes.
a built-in team already there with all the information you're armed with.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
We had a grandfather who had Alzheimer's, and so in the group I had the son, the daughter, and a son. So it was a son and two grandchildren of the person that had the dementia attending the class, the meetings.
Yeah, and that's wonderful, because then the family is cohesive and everybody's kind of on the same page with
Exactly.
understanding what's happening with Grandpa, you know?
That's right, yeah. Yeah, and a lot of people don't want to know, so they don't get involved at all. So they just pretend, nothing's going on.
Yeah, until maybe a crisis happens.
Exactly.
Yeah, which is not a good place to be.
No.
Yeah,
not at
so
all.
the point is, get to a support group, find one that you can identify with, and find one that you click with, because they're all different, right?
Yes, exactly. We had a lady that she has attended the second meeting, and when she attended the first meeting, she said she had prayed about what she wanted in a support group, and she said, when I picked up the phone, when I picked up the list of the different, not the organizations, but the people under the organization that do the classes
Oh, like topics.
or the meetings. Pardon?
Like topics for information? The topics
Just
topics that you were
like
going to
my
be
name
talking
came
about.
up- My name came up on the list, and she saw my name, and she said, "That's where I'm going." And she was just praying that that would be the place where she wanted to go. And so when she did, she said, "You're not going to believe this, but," and she shared with us, and she said, "It is exactly what I was looking for, and I was so afraid that I wouldn't find it."
Well, there you go. So,
Yeah.
caregivers' lesson there is ask for what you need, right?
Yes,
I mean, ask your higher power, ask God, ask
exactly.
your people, ask your friends, neighbors, but ask, because you usually get what you need when you let people know what it is.
Right.
Yeah. So we're going to take our last break, and when we come back, Dora Lee, being the wonderful caregiver support group facilitator that she is for 5 years, is going to share some tips and some advice to you all out there of what to know and things that she's learned along the way that she'd like to pass on to you. So we will be right back. Stay with us.
Feelings of depression, isolation, and frustration are common among persons living with Alzheimer's or related dementias. It's common among those who care for them, too. It takes a lot of patience and courage. It also takes knowing when you can no longer do it alone. At Arden Courts, memory care is all we do. Talk to us. We know. We understand. We can help. Don't let guilt keep you from making the right decision. Visit arden-courts.com. Arden Courts follows equal housing opportunity guidelines. Somewhere at the corner of bewildered and confused is a lost mother, a father, a sibling, a grandparent. Wandering is a common symptom of Alzheimer's or related dementias and can often make those who care for a loved one feel just as lost. If you're looking for a place that's safe and secure, look to Arden Courts. Memory care is all we do. We know, we understand, we can help. To learn more, visit arden-courts.com. Arden Courts follows equal housing opportunity guidelines. Being unable to recognize the obvious often occurs with Alzheimer's or related dementias, even among their caregivers. When the time comes for you to decide that someone you love needs more help than you can give, will you be able to recognize it? Don't wait for a crisis to make the decision for you. Talk to Arden Courts. Memory care is all we do. We know, we understand, we can help. To learn more, visit arden-courts.com. Arden Courts follows equal housing opportunity guidelines.
At 888-565-1470 and talk with Marcia. Now, back to Caregiver Solutions.
My guest today is Dora Lee Shannon. She is a caregiver support group facilitator in San Antonio, Texas, and a former caregiver herself for many years for her mom, who had vascular dementia. So, Dora Lee, we're going to wrap up our show today with some helpful tips and advice that you could give to caregivers, because you've learned so much and you have so much wealth of information from supporting others through their journey. So the floor is yours. Tell people what you'd like to share.
Thank you. I would like to say that that dementia is the umbrella of many types of dementia. Sometimes people have a hard time understanding that. Dementia is a progressive disease. Unfortunately, there is no cure, and you're not going to get better. That needs to sink in.
Yeah,
Alzheimer's is...
Yeah, that is kind of a misconception sometimes, because people, because of their denial maybe, or maybe all the emotions they're going through, they think that with the right medicine and the right environment that people are going to get better. And they do get better in some instances for a short time because of the increase in stimulation and the increase in socialization. But because it's progressive, it doesn't really stop progressing. So people sometimes are fooled that they say, oh, well, he's so much clearer now. He's lucid now. He's better. Well, that's because you've added another element to improve quality of life. But it does not mean that the Alzheimer's has gone away. And I thank you for, sharing that, because that is true, that people do misunderstand that sometimes.
Yes.
Yeah.
And Alzheimer's is the most common form of dementia. That accounts for 60 to 80% of the cases.
Mm-hmm.
And the life expectancy is 10 years. By 2050, we're supposed to double, and an estimated 5 million Americans already have Alzheimer's.
Too many.
Yes. Vascular dementia is number 2. And that takes 10 to 20%, accounts for 10 to 20% of the cases.
Mm-hmm.
And it is more common in women. Don't know why. And life expectancy is about 5 years.
And that's
Mixed
averages,
dementia.
of course.
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
that's correct.
Yeah.
Mixed dementia is a combination of 2 or more types of a dementia. And that can also change the life expectancy. Like, for instance, mother had lived 6 years after being diagnosed. Her life expectancy was 5. Maybe she had something, well, in this case, not quite. But if they have a combination, that can change the numbers also.
Sure. Lots of things can change the numbers. I mean, that's why they are giving you averages, and they're giving, a range, because, it depends on your age, depends on how old you were when you actually got the diagnosis. And we know that prior to
Correct.
diagnosis, people already have symptoms. And then, of course, there's your health factors. And, people that
Exactly.
are not healthy physically, are going to be different than people who are physically healthy. So all of these things enter into
Yes.
it. And there's no, one set that's saying if you do this, this, and this, and this, you're not going to get Alzheimer's
No
because,
magic. There is no
unfortunately,
magic.
it doesn't discriminate.
Right.
Yeah, which is sad.
Educating oneself, yes, it is.
Mm-hmm.
Educating oneself is the best thing you can do. And like I said earlier, get your hands on anything that can help you understand what is going on, because you are going through the journey with that person. The journey is yours also. And anything that you learn is going to be helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Attend workshops, support groups, anything that is going to help you better understand what you're dealing with.
You can listen to the show every week, too. We have other wonderful people like Dora Lee talking about caregiving and talking about dementia. Again, it's another resource. So it's available, right, Dora Lee? You just have to avail yourself
That's
of it.
correct.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And, people look for different things, but there are so many places and so many ways to find all kinds of help.
Mm-hmm.
And then you need to just find out, okay, now what am I looking for? What are my needs here?
Mm-hmm.
And then you know what to look for. But you have to kind of know what you want.
Yeah.
Or else you go to different places and kind of get an idea, oh, I like this,
Mm-hmm.
but I didn't like that,
Mm-hmm.
and then come up with what you want.
Yeah, test the
But-
waters.
Yes, exactly.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I mean, I know people
And if
that
you
go
don't-
to more than one support group because for different
Yes.
reasons that either they need more meetings so they go to different support groups so they can get there more often, or they like the people particularly in one group, or they might like the facilitator, in another group. So there's nothing wrong with going to more than one, but just
No.
find one, right?
Exactly.
Mhm.
I have a gentleman that he just lost his wife about 2-3 months ago, and he goes to 3 different support groups. And right now, he's just trying to do everything he can to get past this part of his life, But she had Alzheimer's.
Oh,
And that's one thing that we do, Marcia, is that when one of our caregivers loses a spouse or a loved one,
mm-hmm.
we don't kick them out. We ask them to stay with us as long as they need to until they feel comfortable not coming.
I think that
until they
helps
have
them
gotten to a point.
helps them by sharing, by giving to others, just like you,
Yes.
helping you get through what your mom was going through by giving, because in giving to others, it helps us heal.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think that,
And
you've done a wonderful job keeping the support group going. I know you have people are coming and going all the time, and I know that people really appreciate what you do out there in the community. Is there anything else that you would tell caregivers, any kind of advice before we have to end today?
No, but the one thing I want to say is the hardest part is losing your loved one one day at a time.
Yeah, one day at a time. And that's all we can do is care for them one day at a time, do the best you can. And if you mess up and you did something wrong, tomorrow's another day. Don't blame yourself.
Exactly.
Don't guilt yourself, right?
That's right.
Do you find that's one of the biggest things is guilt? Do caregivers have a lot of guilt that you find when you're talking with them?
Yes. Oh, yes, a lot.
Mm-hmm.
A lot. But most of the time, it's because they have not educated themselves in the dementia department.
Okay. So by
Once
getting
they do and they know what to do,
Yes.
it becomes easier because they're doing it for their loved one, no longer doing it the wrong way for themselves.
Yeah. So get educated, lessens the guilt, helps you feel more confident in your caregiving efforts. And
Right.
and learn as you go, because sometimes, it's only by learning as you go, because there might be a situation that you never read about, but if you have the confidence and you have the knowledge of what you're dealing with, I think that that's going to help the caregivers try to make those good decisions.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, our
And if you
time
don't
is up
care for
today,
yourself-
Dorley, and I thank you so much for calling in from San Antonio to share with us. And I thank you, the viewers, for listening and watching today on Caregiver Solutions Info Show. Don't forget to call and get your free book, The 36-Hour Day, 888-478-2410, and they'll get the book to you. And also, don't forget to give somebody a hug, because they need it, and so do you. And here, Dorley, is a big hug over the waves for you, all the way to San Antonio.
And to you too, Marcia. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We'll see you next time. Take care.
Thanks for joining us for this week's Caregiver Solutions with Marcia Teal. Join us next week as Marcia, who has 15 years of Alzheimer's disease and dementia care experience, brings you more needed information to help with the care of your loved one. This show can be seen again on caregiversolutions.info, and questions can be left on the site, which may be used on the program to help others. See you next week for more Caregiver Solutions. The opinions expressed on the preceding sponsored program were strictly those of its host